hello again. We meet again with Mr. Daniel Kovalik. In first episode, we are talking about his background and U.S. intervention, and also the paradox of democracy and international law. Now we are talking about the late news, especially for Ukraine war, and also the future of the supremacy of US, how long will it be end, and how we handle this issue. And still with Mr. Dan Kovalik. Good night, Mr. Dan. Good night for
Good
Indonesian.
evening. Hello.
Good
Yes.
evening. Okay, it is far away, Indonesia and United States. 11 hours.
Yes. Yeah. It's morning here. It's morning here. Yeah.
It's morning. Okay. Let's talk about the hot issue, Mr. Dan Kovalik. You, I think, right about the rule of United States, the CIA plotting the war in any kind of country, and the late is making war in Ukraine. Do you think that United States making the war, or they need the war after the war in Damascus, of course, because the project is finished? At least suspending, and the end is chaos. You know that Gaddafi is killed, and also another place. So I think the future of the Ukraine war will be, we don't know, but some experts say it is unpredictable because Russia has nuclear power, China has nuclear power, United States also, the alliance of NATO and versus Russia. So for first question, do you think that United States really have intention to make war in Ukraine? Tell me.
Oh yes. I mean, they wanted this for a long time, and there's actually evidence of that. Conversations that have been leaked where it's very clear that U.S. officials wanted this war in order to draw Russia in. They wanted Russia to come in to try to weaken Russia, very much in the same way that the U.S. drew purposefully the Soviet Union into Afghanistan by supporting the Mujahideen. We know from Brzezinski, who was the national security advisor under Carter, he admitted that the U.S. was supporting the Mujahideen in Afghanistan 6 months before the Soviet Union intervened. And they supported the Mujahideen to force the Soviet Union to come in order to weaken and undermine the Soviet Union, which did work, actually. And it's the same idea. And in fact, Brzezinski wrote in his book, The Grand Chessboard, in 1997, that he wanted the same thing to happen in Ukraine. Wanted to draw the Russians into a conflict that would undermine them, if not destroy them. So all this is happening according to plan. And right now, Afghanistan is losing the war, but the U.S. doesn't care so much as long as they can keep Ukraine fighting to keep, trying to sap Russia of its energy, of its troops, etc. So it's a very ugly situation. Again, I think most Americans don't understand that at all. They don't understand that reality, but that is the reality of it.
Okay. If we see the history during Vietnam War, you know that the United States policy is again the majority of American people aspiration, again the majority. Do you think that the majority of United States doesn't agree with the Ukraine war, or at least we can say that Ukraine project war?
Well, The polls don't really show that. Here's what the polls show. They show that 81% of Democrats support it. 81%, which is huge. And then still a majority, but bare majority of Republicans support it. So you put those two together and you have a majority of Americans probably do support the war, unfortunately, right? And so that's the job of people like me, is to convince the American people otherwise, to oppose the war, to oppose supporting Ukraine militarily. But I think the propaganda has been very effective at
But what about the
convincing people.
Republic Party?
Yeah, again, a majority of Republicans polled support the war. Bare majority. It's something like 52%. So that's better than the Democrats, but it's still a majority. So, and if you look at the leadership of the Republicans, they claim that they were going to stop Biden from having a blank check to send money to Ukraine. But then every time it comes up to a vote in Congress, the Republicans vote for it also. I mean, there's a few who don't, but only a very few. So there is bipartisan support for this, unfortunately, but that is the case at the present.
Do you think that, are you sure that the poll is represent the truth, or you have another opinion?
I think it's accurate. I mean, again, I think there's a lot of Republicans who oppose it, and that poll shows that. You know, it shows that nearly 50% oppose it, which I think sounds correct. And certainly I agree. I do believe most Democrats support the war. I mean, that's my anecdotal evidence would suggest that's true. Most people that I know, and most of my friends are liberals and Democrats. Most of them support the war. So I do think that that's an accurate reflection of the situation. And again, it shouldn't be too big of a surprise. I mean, the propaganda around this issue has been as intense or more intense than I've ever seen. The censorship of opposing views has been intense. So, you know, it doesn't surprise me that they have buy-in from most of the American people for this.
Okay, Mr. Daniel, if we are talking about the poll is just a poll, but we have to follow the poll because it is instrument of democracy. But the reality is that we don't know exactly. We don't have another answer, because if the poll is 80%, so we have to follow the poll. But at least we see from the war of the Vietnam, okay, we see the demonstration, a lot of demonstration against the war. So
right.
So what about now? The people of
But we don't see that now. We don't see that now. That's the point. You haven't seen that type of demonstration in the United States since 2002, 2003, when there were massive protests against the Iraq War. But since that time, you have not seen massive demonstrations, peace demonstrations in the United States. There are some, they're very tiny. And the protest against the war in Ukraine has been very, very small. I'll give you an example. There were two demonstrations recently in Washington, D.C. against the war. One in, I want to say the end of January, and one in March. And combined, I don't think there were 10,000 people there at the two rallies combined. Again, that's in a country of 330 million people. That is not impressive. You know, I'm sad to say that. I was at the one in March, you know, but that's the reality. The peace movement is, at least at the moment,
okay,
it's moribund.
Mr. Daniel, you know that the democracy, the purpose of democracy is for the wealth of the people. So should be correlated with the welfare of the people. And if I ask you, what is the benefit of Ukraine war for you? as a United States citizen?
Oh, none. Absolutely none. I
None?
mean, this war is benefiting the defense contractors. Uh, it's benefiting the gas and oil companies, right? That they have new customers in Europe because they aren't buying Russian oil and gas. It doesn't benefit me. It doesn't benefit the vast majority of American people.
Mm.
In fact, what continues to happen in the United States is that, first of all, there's been a rise in inflation, significant rise in inflation due to sanctions against Russia, which are hurting the American people. Everything's more expensive,
Mm.
including housing, and you see more homeless people. I could show you out my window here, my city of Pittsburgh. I mean, the number of homeless downtown has increased greatly. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. These wars do not help people like me. They do not help the average American person. And it's amazing that the American people can be convinced to vote against their own self-interest time and time again.
Mm.
But that's what, again, we talked about Chomsky in the last interview, and that's what he wrote about in books like Manufacturing Consent, that, the propaganda. I believe American people are the most propagandized people on earth. And the reason is they don't know that they're being propagandized. They think that their press is a free press, and that what they read in the New York Times is true, or what they hear on National Public Radio is true. And it's not true. There's a lot of lies about what's happening in the world, but the American people don't see that. So yeah, I mean, you ask a very important question, and the answer is these wars hurt the American people. They estimate that the so-called war on terror after 9/11 cost the United States something like $6 to $8 trillion. That's money that could have been used for infrastructure and poverty alleviation and healthcare and education. It didn't go to those things. It went to wars that, again, did not defend the United States. These were not wars against terrorists. In fact, the irony is the U.S. decided to attack countries that were against Al Qaeda, right? Saddam Hussein was a mortal enemy of Al Qaeda. So was Muammar Gaddafi. And yet those were the countries we chose to attack and take out. We didn't go after Saudi Arabia, which was actually involved in 9/11. In fact, right, we just continued to partner with them. So the U.S. people have been sold a lie time and time again to support these wars. And again, so people like me, we try to point that out. And it's a very difficult task we have, because the American people are very, very quick to believe their government and believe their media.
Okay, Mr. Dan, and we know that the misery or the sadness is the inflation, not only for Europe as the instrument for U.S. against Russia, but I think, like you said, that United States citizen get inflation, so nothing to do with the people of United States and the Europe. So I think,
correct.
But if you follow, we follow the that the pioneer, the project should be take benefit. Of course, it would be take benefit, like defense minister or the contractor, what we say that military industrial complex is
Right.
untouchable for the people, like you and Mr. Chomsky talking about democracy, to promoting democracy. It's nothing to do with democracy. So again,
No.
the purpose of democracy itself. So do you think, that this war will end like another war? Do you think?
Well, I think it will. I mean, I hope it will, in the sense that I hope it doesn't become a greater war, a nuclear war, which it could. I mean, that's a possibility. I hope it will end like other wars. I hope there will be some sort of armistice and peace agreement that will settle this conflict. And I hope that happens soon. The bloodshed on both sides of this conflict are terrible. And it's, again, another instance where the U.S. gets to fight a war without losing any of its own troops, right? It gets others to fight the war for it, which also makes it easier for the American people to buy into, right? They don't have body bags coming back like in Vietnam, right? They don't have to bear the cost of the war in the way that the Ukrainians have to bear the cost, or the Russians, right? And that makes it easier to support the war. It's more theoretical, right? It's almost like a video game. It's something happening way over there. But I do hope it ends, again, as other wars have, with a peace agreement and with some relative calm and stability. But wars are not predictable. That's why the UN Charter was created, and the UN was created to prevent war, because they know that the people involved who just experienced World War II know that once the dogs of war are released, you cannot predict the outcome, and terrible things happen that you could not have even foreseen. Some can be foreseen, but so we hope that the worst does not happen, right? But again, some of that's up to the people of the West to say, hey, we want this war to end. We want our governments to stop funding Ukraine and stop supporting this conflict. I mean, that, it really is up to those populations to make their voices heard on that. And again, that's really the task of people like me, is to try to encourage people to do that.
Okay, Mr. Dan, I want to ask about your activity in Ukraine. But before your comment about the inside of Ukraine, you know that some experts say that like any kind of empire will be down. Okay, so there is a time and place. Any kind of empire will down, and if we see the indication of the dawn of the United States empire, we see that everybody talk about de-dollarization, the bridge, Shanghai Cooperation, and African, that Putin collecting, collecting the leader of Africa, and also the China, any kind of country, small country close to China, to Russia. So I think if we see dollar as instrument of the empire, we're talking about the economic empire will down. And if it is true, so there is no money anymore. There is no legitimacy anymore, because the ending of the war, the ending of war, the purpose of the war is the money. But if we don't have a money for war, so the country, United States, will face, that, before the United States was birthed in the first place, that the United
Right.
States have a war, brotherhood war. They have to fight with the British. So we'll back to the maybe 100, 150 years back. So do you think that
Right.
it will be true or not?
Well, I think the U.S. empire will collapse for sure, but a couple things about that. I'm not sure it will happen quickly. Even you saw the BRICS had their meeting and they decided not to create their own currency, right? That was an idea, but they've decided they're going to continue with the currencies that exist, including the US dollar. So I think the US dollar is certainly weakening, but it's not an imminent risk of total collapse. And I think the American military empire is not an imminent risk of collapse. But I do think in the medium to long term, yes, it will collapse for several reasons. I mean, one is we just can't afford it anymore. And as the American people continue to become more impoverished, which they are, there's just not going to be the revenue for these wars, right? And also there's serious social problems in the United States. I think the US society is collapsing in some ways. And so again, I think it's going to be hard to mobilize people to support these efforts. And so yes, the empire will collapse like all others, but it could take a while. And also the truth is the process of it collapsing will not be pretty. Everyone will suffer as a result of it because the US is so powerful. It has so much influence. It has, its economy has so many tentacles in the world that it won't be pretty when it goes down. So many countries still depend on the dollar. I'll give an example. I go to Nicaragua, I go to Venezuela. These are countries under sanctions. They're trying to get off the dollar. They've been trying, and yet they haven't been able to. And in fact, when you go to those two countries, the dollar, people want your dollars more than they want the local currency. Right? And that's true in a lot of countries. So these are not easy things to break away from. So I think the empire is in slow decline, but it's not in a fast decline. Not yet. That could happen. We could see that at some point, but not right now. Not right now, I don't think.
So it takes time, yeah? It takes time.
It takes time. It takes time. Yes.
Okay, then I'm very happy to hear about that because it has come from the United States citizen. But okay, let's talk about your activity in Ukraine. I heard that you have activity. I don't know your activity. Please tell me about it.
Well, I've been to the Donbass twice, and the Donbass is in what was Eastern Ukraine. Now the two republics in the Donbass, Donetsk and Luhansk, voted to become part of Russia last year. So they consider themselves part of Russia, and Russia considers themselves part of Russia. But they're situated in what has been Eastern Ukraine since 1991. Well, even before that, really since about 1954, when I'm sorry. Since 1991. Since 1991. And what I did, I traveled there to see what was happening, to see what the conflict meant to those people, to interview people, to see, what their view was on the war, what their view was on why Russia's there, if they support Russia being there. And by and large, the people there do support Russia being there, because there's been a war in that area since 2014. Right? 14,000 people died in that conflict between the government of Ukraine and its own people in the Donbass. 14,000 people died in that conflict before Russia even intervened last year. And that has to be pointed out to people. A lot of people don't know that. And again, they don't know it because the West has tried to suppress that reality. But that's a reality. And I met with people who've been fighting since 2014. People have lost people, family members, friends since 2014, have experienced these Nazis from Ukraine. And know that they're fighting fascism, So their view of the conflict is very different than what the West, than their view that we're being told, that this is just bad Russia invading Ukraine. And it's not quite like that. The areas Russia's actually in are areas that largely support Russia. That's the truth. Western Ukraine, that's different. But in Eastern Ukraine, Southern Ukraine, there's support for Russia. And I think those people's voices need to be heard. And that's why I went there, to amplify their voices one, as people who have been subjected to brutality by the Ukrainian government. The Ukrainian government is not this angelic force like we're being told. And also honesty to give the other side of Russia's participation in that conflict, right? It's not this black and white thing where Russia's all bad in this. And there are people in those regions that welcome Russia being there. And that's just a truth. And if there's ever going to be peace in Ukraine, the interests and opinions of those people in the Donbass, in some of the other areas, have to be heard and respected. And that may mean, and probably likely mean, that they will stay part of Russia and they will not go back to Ukraine. And that's Ukraine's fault because they allowed themselves to be used by the United States as a proxy against Russia. And that meant not just against Russia, the country, but against Russian-speaking and ethnic people living in Ukraine. And that's a sad reality, but that's a reality I saw there.
What about the Orthodox Christian there? Christian Orthodox?
Yeah, well, they're being persecuted. They're being persecuted by the government in Kiev. I've seen monasteries destroyed by Ukraine. I've heard people tell me about monasteries being destroyed by Ukraine. We know that's happening. And what happens is if a church there, an Orthodox church, does not agree to give fealty to the new patriarch in Kiev and instead gives their fealty to the patriarch in Moscow, which the Orthodox people have done for centuries, then they are likely to have their church destroyed by the government in Ukraine.
Okay, then you know that the Orthodox Church in Ukraine, I don't know where they live. The church, I mean, are they still in Donbass or?
Oh yeah, they're all over.
All over the
they're
Ukraine.
all over Ukraine. I mean, it's an Orthodox country. They're all over. They're in Kiev. They're everywhere. And even I saw a church in Kiev is being looted by the government. They're going to sell off their antiquities. You know, so no, they're all over Ukraine, and the Ukrainian government is trying to destroy those churches. And that is something, again, we're not hearing much in the West. Once in a while you hear a little something, but it's not something that people are raising the flag about, and they should be. It's a terrible thing that's happening.
So first is about ethnicity, second about the language of Russia, and now about the Orthodox Church.
It's about anything Russian, right? Anything Russian, language, ethnicity, religion, memorials. You know, old Soviet memorials are being taken down. The Russian language was outlawed in Ukraine. This is an attack against ethnic Russians. This is a genocidal war that the government in Kiev has been waging. I mean, that's a fact. But that is something, yeah.
But if we assume that it's true, so of course it would be justified for Russia to attack all over the Ukraine to save the that Orthodox Church. Do you think so?
I've argued that. I believe that. I think Russia had a legitimate reason to go into Ukraine. I do think that.
Because you know that the Wagner will, I think come to Ukraine and only 200 kilometers from Belarus. Yeah. Now the soldier of Wagner is in Belarus under the protection of the president of Belarus, and will come to Ukraine, not only Donbass, but maybe all over the Ukraine. Do you think so?
Kiev, they might, and it may have to. Yeah,
Kiev,
it may have to come to that. Yeah. Sadly, it may have to come to that. You know, there was a peace deal that was hammered out last year in March of last year that Zelensky signed on to with Putin that could have ended this war, and the U.S. and UK intervened to prevent that peace agreement from becoming a reality, right? And I believe under that agreement, most, if not all, maybe aside from Crimea, Ukraine would have kept all its territory. But it's too late for that now.
Okay,
and I think probably Russia will go into Kiev at some point. I do think that it's probably bound to happen. So
okay, last question. I need your response. It is very difficult to say because, from the perspective of Russia, it is all about the security threat. But for the United States, it's all about military industrial. Not complex, is actually not complex because easy, because it's all about the money.
right.
So,
right.
in one side, because of the existential threat, another side, because of the money. So,
right.
do you think that, about the policy of Putin, intervene in Ukraine? I said about the term of invasion. Do you agree about it?
Well, again, I've used that term, and then people in the Donbass said, "Well, it's not really an invasion because we wanted Russia to come in," and that's true. The people of the Donbass
No, I
wanted
mean
Russia to come in 2004.
from international law perspective.
Well, it could be seen that way, but it also could be seen as collective self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter, because these two republics, Luhansk and Donetsk, which declared independence, and Russia recognized their independence, those two republics asked Russia to intervene. And so there's an argument to be made.
Okay,
that
two
Russia,
region. We can say that we can use it for argument, two region. But what about the Kiev?
Well, no, I agree. That's a good point. But in the war, you could argue that going after Kiev was necessary to protect those two regions, right? I mean, you can have a theoretical idea that Russia could only go into those regions to protect them, but of course, if they're being attacked from Kiev and all the military powers coming out of Kiev, at some point you have to attack that power in Kiev to win. I mean, that's just reality.
So about Orthodox,
I think there's an
demolizing of Orthodox Christian monastery in all over the Ukraine, and the news cluster bomb is more justified for Putin to intervene all over the Ukraine. And that the more Zelensky make a problem, make complicated, the more Putin will intervene all over the Ukraine. Do you think so?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, again, I think Russia did not want to do that. They wanted a negotiated solution that could have happened last year. The U.S. and U.K. prevented it, but now it's probably too late for that. That probably Russia will have to go into Kiev. I mean, that, and everyone I talked when the Donbass said that, they said this will now have to end with Kiev, falling, with the government in Kiev falling, because the current government in Kiev is irredeemable. I think that they will fight to the end, not because they care about their own people. They're willing to sacrifice their own people, but because they operate at the behest of the United States. That's what it comes down to. These Zelensky and his crew, they're puppets of the U.S. They're doing this for the U.S. And when this is all first, they'll just take billions of dollars and run to Miami or Bahamas or something, loyal to their country. They look a lot like the leadership in South Vietnam, during the conflict there. These are Quislings, loyal, patriotic people. So realized, and given that, I have to collapse for this to end.
Okay, Mr. Dan, thank you very much. I'm very glad to hear your voice, United States citizen. I like it, because it's very difficult to find the guys like you talking about openly about your government. Actually, for me, I never get feeling hate United States people. No, not at all, because I think there is some I don't know, what I say, the people, certain people control the United States, not the people of United States. And it is very sad,
Right.
very sad to us. And I hope that you can share your opinion, your voice in another segment. Thank you very much, Mr. Dane. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mohammed. It was my honor. It was my honor and pleasure, Mohammed. Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Okay.